This is a Film Stories original podcast.
We made this.
Hello and welcome back to the Xcast. The truth is in here. I am your host for today. My name is Clara Cook, and joining me is our special guest, X-File fan Jenn Ferguson. Jenn, how are you today?
I'm very good, Clara. How are you?
I'm good. It's great to have you on the show. I don't think that we've ever podcasted before.
I don't think we have. I'm pretty excited. This is like, I might fangirl a little bit because I've heard you on the Xcast so many times, and I'm pretty excited to be podcasting with you right now.
And you've never been on the Xcast, I understand.
Yeah, I've been on the Xcast in a roundtable format. Mm-hmm. And I've been on in a couple of sort of group situations, but this is my first time as like a solo guest, so I'm pretty excited.
And you know what that means? That means that we have to do the 5 questions of X.
Okay, yeah, all right, I'm ready.
You can't fail at this. It's not a quiz. You can't fail this.
Okay, all right.
But you will be judged. You'll be judged on your answers.
Don't be nervous. You'll just be judged. Okay, all right, I hear you. Okay, bring it on.
So, just a little background to everybody. Today we're going to talk a little bit about the episode Memento Mori, which is a season 4 episode, which is the start of the story arc surrounding Scully's cancer. But before we do that, I think we need to hear about Jenn's love of the X-Files, how she got into it. And for that, we need to do the 5 questions of X. When did you first discover the X-Files?
It was definitely back in season 1. I'd like to say it was like I was right in on the ground floor with the pilot, but I cannot say that. I think I caught on somewhere partway through season 1 when it was airing, and the first episode I can specifically remember is Tombs. I may have picked up episodes before that in just casually, but that's the first one that stands out in my mind. So that's the one that really grabbed me. So that was a really good one to sort of catch on, and I was just intrigued by these characters and like, what is even happening right now? And who's the guy smoking the cigarette? And what's all this about? So, and I'm like, a significant shipper. So that was a pretty good episode to kind of get me all shipped up, and I was into the ship from word go. So that definitely grabbed me, and then I was a pretty major X-Files fan right from then on. So right back in the 90s, and I wasn't even a child. I'd like to say I was, but I was a grown woman. I had just gotten married the year before, so it's been my whole adult life has been the X-Files. So and happy for it to be so.
Yeah, I think a lot of people, they actually started with Tombs, actually, and I've heard, in other podcasts and on the internet and stuff, people have said, well, the first episode I watched was Tombs, and I was just so taken by the sort of dynamic between Mulder and Scully. There is a real shipper moment in Tombs, isn't there?
Oh, yes, there is.
Yeah, there is.
Yeah. Yeah, Fate Mulder. Yeah, exactly. You know what I'm talking about.
It's a good episode to start with, I think.
It is an excellent episode to start with, especially, if someone like me's got a shipper inside them just waiting to come out, then that's a good one because it's a great monster story, but we do get like some very nice little intriguing shipper moments. So it definitely is a good one to start with.
Is that your favourite episode, or is another one your favourite episode?
I don't think it's my favourite. It has a special place in my heart, obviously. But, my favourite episode, that is a toughie. Every time someone like says, oh, this is my favorite episode, a lot of the times I will say, yeah, that's my favorite episode too. And then someone will say, oh, but this is my favorite episode. And I'll be like, yes, that's my favorite episode. So I have a hard time sticking to one. There's like about 3 or 4 that I rotate through on a regular basis in terms of I decide for a while that's my favorite, and then maybe I'll go back to another one. It's usually whichever one I happen to have watched most recently of that sort of core group. And so in this case, of course, it's Memento Mori, and that is one of my 3 favorites. I always sort of put that Memento Mori, Requiem, and Pusher are kind of my three favorites.
Oh,
and
good choices.
Yeah. You can tell I'm an angst lover because those are my favorites. And so since I watched Memento Mori in preparation for our podcast for like the zillionth time, it's my favorite today, and it's with good reason. It's a great episode. So how happy am I to be able to spend the next while talking about Memento Mori with you?
So what is your favorite season? Would it be season 4? Or?
Yeah, I think it is season 4. Again, I tend to flip flap between seasons 3 and 4. It's got to be something in the first 5 seasons for me, because I was never really happy about the move from Vancouver to LA, whether that's because I'm a Canadian or because I just liked the Vancouver look of the show. So I tend to pick 3 or 4, but 4 wins out by a bit because it has Memento Mori in it, and because I just really do like that whole cancer arc. I mean, it's angst aplenty, and so that's just right up my alley. So yeah, I gotta say season 4, but there's not that many seasons I don't like, so it's not like by a wide margin.
Yeah, season 4 is pretty good though, isn't it? Because a lot of it, sort of, there's a lot of Scully in it. There's a lot of sort of real kind of getting into the whole abduction fallout, a lot of the stuff. A lot of what's happened to her as a result of the abduction, because they kind of took a bit of a sort of break from that in season 3. I suppose there's actually, I can't remember, is 739, the one with the train?
731?
731, thank you.
Yeah, I think, is that season 3, I want to say?
And that's season 3, yeah. So they do explore it a bit, but in season 4 it's much more.
Yeah.
I feel like the stakes get higher in season 4.
They do, definitely. But I do like the fact that there's like little seeds planted along the way after her abduction. I always love those episodes. It's like, yay, we're going to talk about the abduction again because, there's going to be angst. So love that. So
it sounds a little bit like Scully might be your favorite. Is Scully your favorite character?
Yeah, you got me on that one for sure. She is my favorite. I mean, if MSR were a character, I suppose I could call that my favorite character. But
2 of them together.
Yeah, exactly. Because the 2 of them together are magic, right? But if I had to pick, I'd pick Scully. I mean, Scully's awesome. She kicks ass. She's smart. She stands up for herself. She's never intimidated, no matter what the scenario. Even though she's also can show that she's vulnerable. She's not like perfect. She's not a robot, but she's tough. So I love Scully. I want to be Scully. If I could be someone, I'd be Scully.
Oh yeah, me too. She just she goes out there, she takes names, she kicks ass, she gets everything done. Do you know what I mean?
I do know what you mean. Absolutely.
She's really good at science.
Yes, she sciences it. Yeah, exactly. It's like she's so good at the things I'm bad at. So that's awesome.
She remembers all the dates that the presidents died, right?
Yes. Who needs Google when you've got Scully? I just love that.
So what's your favourite moment of the series? Who could choose a favourite moment?
Yeah, that's a toughie. I'd have to go with. I mean, I don't know how long a moment's allowed to be, but I mean, I would start with Fight the Future. Specifically, if I'm allowed to use the movies, and I'm just going to.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, good. The scene in Mulder's apartment hallway rather, where of course there's an almost kiss and there's a bee and all that. But probably my favorite moment out of that scene. I mean, there could be a couple, but I mean, it's that whole speech from Mulder about what Scully means to him. And, I mean, he says she makes him a whole person. I mean, if that's not a declaration of love, I don't know what is. It's better than a declaration of love in my books. So, I mean, definitely. I owe you everything, Scully, and you owe me nothing is like, gets me every time. I'd kiss him after that, too, bee or no bee. So I love it. That's like the quintessential shipper moment for me right there. So I love it. Love that scene. Cannot get enough of it.
Yeah, and then they go on to become platonic again. And I'm like, how can you be platonic after he says something to you like that?
Yeah, no, that is just wrong right there.
That's not platonic.
It's not.
You make me a better human.
Yeah, no,
You know, a
no,
whole
never.
person.
It's not platonic at all in my books, right from the word go. There's just too much going on between these two all the time.
So thank you for answering the 5 questions of X. Don't worry, you haven't been judged.
Oh, good. All right.
Or you've been judged, but
yeah,
you
someone
but you come
judged
out.
me. I mean, the
You
no
come out on
robos,
top.
the no robos are unhappy with me right now, but that's okay. They often are.
So now I think we could talk about the episode, Memento Mori. So
Yeah.
to look at the episode a little bit more in depth, the basic summary of the episode is that it sees Scully discover that she has inoperable cancer, and she begins treatment with a mysterious doctor. Meanwhile, Mulder and the lone gunman break into a government research lab to try and find a cure to save her. It's episode 14 of season 4. The title Memento Mori is Latin for remember death, sort of like remember you will die, basically.
Mm-hmm.
And it was first aired on the 9th of February 1997. It was written by Chris Carter, Vince Gilligan, John Shaban, and Frank Spotnitz. So it's a real team effort. It was written by all 4 of them. And I think it went from basically initial ideas to being like a sort of written ideas of the script, being an actual whole script in about 3 or 4 days. So they wrote it really quickly. And they kind of had to do that because I think another writer was going to write an episode and then just couldn't do it. So they had like a gap in the schedule. And I think they knew they wanted to do an episode on Scully's cancer, but I don't think they intended to do it that early in the season. So it was a real team effort, and they managed to whip the script up very quickly. It was directed by Rob Bowman, and it's got quite a high rating on IMDb. It's got 8.6 out of 10, which is quite high. But I actually think it could be higher. What do you think? Do you think this is fair?
Yeah, I mean that's a decent rating, but I am surprised it's not a little bit higher, to be honest. I mean, I never know what sense to make of IMDb ratings anyway, but it's a really solid episode in my books. I'm not sure who would be rating it lower than an 8 or why they would be, but I should have an open mind, I suppose. There's probably people that hate it for various reasons, just like there's every episode has people that don't like it. But for me, even trying to be objective, I mean, it's my favorite episode today, so it's hard for me to be objective, but I feel like it should be a 9 easily. I feel like that anyway, but maybe not everyone is as big an angst fan as I am.
No, I agree with you. I would give it a 9 out of 10. The only reason I wouldn't give it a 10 out of 10 is because of the voiceovers. I have a problem with voiceovers in the X-Files.
Oh, Clara, you and I are going to be really good friends because I so agree.
Yeah, and especially the ones written for Scully, I think. Actually, the ones written for Mulder are also really weird.
They're all bad, yeah. Clara. They're all bad.
They sort of talk like no one would ever actually talk, you know?
Yes! You've articulated perfectly exactly my problem. No one speaks like that or writes like that. If they're like writing in a journal to themselves, I don't care who you are. Unless you're writing a poem, you're not going to speak like that. It makes no sense. It's just so ridiculous. I mean, numinous mysteries, seriously, Chris Carter. It's just, it's kind of amazing anyone even kept watching the episode after that opening monologue in Memento Mori, because it's terrible. It makes no sense when you're just listening to it. And I even made an effort to read it in a transcript of the episode this week for the first time. And even reading it, it's like, what the heck is this? And then I told myself, okay, let's pretend it's a poem. And if you pretend it's a poem and you're not really supposed to understand it, every word of it completely, then I can kind of get behind it a little bit. But it's not supposed to be a poem. It's supposed to be something that someone is saying. And no one speaks like that. It's ridiculous.
Yeah, she's supposed to be writing to Mulder, isn't she?
Yes!
And I just think the way that... I can't imagine... And even actually, but we'll go on to talk about it, but he does read what she's written in the end. And even then, when she finds out, she does seem a little bit embarrassed. Like,
I'd be embarrassed.
I don't want you to read that.
I know.
I'm like, you should be embarrassed.
Dude, you should be embarrassed. And you were right to want to throw it away. Because it's terrible. I think this episode was nominated for an Emmy for writing, which I'm like,
yeah, it was.
How?
Actually, yeah.
I mean, please don't tell me that someone thought that was good writing. I'm just assuming that it's like everything but those parts, but I don't know. Maybe someone in the Emmy selection committee thought that's how television should sound, but I am not one of them. No, it for a while there, it actually knocked Memento Mori right out of my top 10. I became so annoyed by the voiceovers. But then I calmed down and just learned to ignore them, and I rediscovered my love for the episode.
So yeah, you're actually right about this. The episode was nominated for an Emmy for its writing, and the episode actually won an Emmy Award for Best Direction. And Gillian Anderson won an Emmy for Best Actress for her performance in this episode.
Yeah.
So, and another little piece of trivia, which I'll tell you guys now, but I mean, we can revisit when we get to that point in the scene. But there's a scene in this episode which stars a snow globe, and the snow globe was actually made from scratch for $2,000.
Wow.
I know, most expensive snow globe on the planet.
Wow.
So that's probably the most expensive prop I've ever... Well, actually, probably not the most expensive prop that's ever been showcased on television. But that's an important piece of trivia. Everybody.
That is interesting.
Yeah. And it's like a blink and you'll miss it scene, really. So let's look at Memento Mori in more depth. So the teaser starts out with a long shot, sort of a blurry focus becoming sharp, almost like a long tracking shot, sort of like going down a long corridor towards a bright light. And Scully is at the end of it, standing in a hospital gown. And as the scene sharpens and you can see what's going on, she's standing in a hospital gown, looking at an X-ray of her skull, and there's a mass on the X-ray, which is obviously the tumour that we all know at the time. We didn't necessarily know what it was, but now we do. And the tumour is basically up in the top of her nasal cavity. And this whole scene, as we said, is dubbed over by a long voiceover performed by Gillian Anderson. And I think we've covered how we feel about this voiceover. But this teaser is actually really beautifully filmed. And did you have the same feeling when you watched it?
I did. For a long time, I think when I first watched it, like way back in the day, I was quite entranced by the whole thing. I think I actually didn't mind the voiceover at that time. I was young and impressionable, and it was just very striking, the whole thing. It is really beautifully shot, and I underestimated how beautiful that opening scene is for quite a long time because I was distracted by the voiceover that annoyed me so thoroughly. But I honestly, just rewatching it again this week and looking at it a little bit, trying to be a little bit more objective about it, and ignoring the voiceover, I had not really fully grasped how beautifully shot that opening scene is. And it's just gorgeous. I love how the very opening shot, to me, looks like a candle flame. I'm not sure if it's meant to look like that, but that's what it looks like, because there's like a little sort of flicker of white in the center of the screen. And it's just gorgeous. And the way it's shot and the way it comes around to Scully's face and the way she's lit by like the X-ray machine thing, and she just that expression, of course, that Gillian Anderson pulls off like the perfect facial expression like she always does. It's beautiful. It's a beautiful scene. The music's great. I've got to sort of just learn to tune out the voiceover a little bit, but it's a really beautiful opening scene, actually.
Yeah, and I think if they just toned down the voiceover a little bit, like you say, you could hear the music even more, and the music's really beautiful.
Yeah.
It's kind of Scully sort of confronting her mortality, really, isn't it? So
yeah.
The very last line that she says is something about Mulder having to travel this journey alone. Like, she's basically saying, I can't go with you, I can't be there in the future because I'm not going to survive.
Oh my
gosh. And that's a good point
to
end the teaser on. It's just, they just tone down some of the, I don't know, flowery language. Yeah, I agree with you. The whole scene would be perfect.
Take out that numinous mysteries part, and I'd be a lot happier. What? No one even knows like what the word numinous means. Like, who's using that word? But that final line is actually, I mean, as much as I'm knocking the voiceover, there are actually some nice parts of it. And that final line, something like, I hope you will forgive me for not completing the journey with you, or something like that. It's beautiful. It's a beautiful line, and the way it sort of corresponds with looking at Scully's face and her expression on her face is really quite captivating. So, man, if they could have just edited that a little bit, that writing, it would have wound up.
Put it down.
Yeah, just like take a few bits out. I'll do it. Just leave it to me. And it probably would have been my favorite teaser maybe in the history of the series. But I got to knock a couple of points off for that, the rest of that voiceover. But other than that, it's really intriguing. Like, really, really, it's very different, obviously, from the typical teaser opening. There's no monster. There's no action. It's just Scully standing there, and that makes it really intriguing for that reason.
Yeah, and we have to remember the first time that we would have seen this. I mean, now we've seen so much X-Files now that we know what's going to happen. We've seen this episode multiple times, but the first time you see it, it must have been a real shock initially to sort of think, oh my God, she's sick and you know, she's going to die. And then the titles start and then you're like, oh my goodness, what's going on? Like, no, not Scully's gonna... So I think it was supposed to have an emotional kick, really.
And this sort of feeling that I often had when watching the X-Files, which is a feeling of the emotional kick and the complete confusion at the same time. But like, you know, you're supposed to feel that way. So I kind of like that feeling of what's going on and being like, oh, I can't wait to find out what this is all about.
So basically Scully diagnoses herself, which I think is always amusing, that she's always doing scientific experiments on herself and diagnosing herself.
Yeah.
And explains to Mulder she has a tumour in her nasal cavity. And Mulder is the only person she's told. And at that, when I first watched the episode years and years and years ago, but even now, this still gives me a little bit of a sad feeling because I think, oh God, poor Margaret Scully.
Yeah, you know right away.
Poor Mama Scully.
Yeah.
Your daughter's not telling you anything. And she's pretty brave about the whole thing, to be honest. Mulder's kind of speechless, and you get the feeling that he would never accept losing her to anything, really, to abduction by aliens or government officials, to cancer, to, I don't know, some crazy serial killer. He's never going to ever accept that sort of thing. And I thought this was quite keeping with Mulder's character, that he refuses to accept a no-win scenario when it comes to her. What do you think?
Yeah, very much so. And I mean, it's interesting how Scully says, you know, they've kind of flipped roles a little bit, where usually it's her saying, I refuse to believe that. And in this case, it's him. And like right from the beginning, he's like, okay, no, there must be treatment. There's something that can be done. And what I really like about that scene is from the get-go, it's not, well, you can do something about this. Surely you can do something. He actually at one point, like he says, we. He starts at one point, I think he starts a sentence, we can, and he kind of trails off, but it's we from the beginning. It's like, we're gonna fight this together. And I love that. My shipper heart went pitter-patter. And he's in this fight with her from the beginning. And he obviously has more of at the beginning, he has more of a desire to fight it in a way than Scully does. Scully's very sort of matter-of-fact on the surface, very sort of accepting of to her, this is reality. I have to accept it. I'm probably going to die. And Mulder's at the point of, no, we're going to fight this. And Scully's not really at that point yet. Yeah,
they're both in sort of different stages of denial, aren't they?
Yeah.
He's denying that they can't fight it, and she's kind of in denial that the idea of dying might be disturbing or upsetting. Like, she doesn't really show much emotion, where she's sort of like, yep, it's inoperable, like, I just have to accept it. People do have this kind of cancer. Yeah. And, I mean, it's almost like she's in shock, because I would be a lot more devastated if I found out I was going to die, you know?
Yeah. She is very sort of, like, you know, clinical about it. She's, like, detached, like you say, they're both in denial and expressing it in different ways. And she's just very, she's, like, in kind of, like, doctor mode. It's as though she's, like, talking about another patient, practically. And she's just because, you know, she's trying to hold it together. And I think she knows if she speaks about it with any degree of emotion or subjectivity, then she's just going to completely lose it. And she doesn't want to do that.
So the next scene, it shows Mulder and Scully in Skinner's office. And Scully's telling him about the fact that she's got cancer. And Skinner genuinely seems really quite upset about it. So he expresses how sorry he is. As Scully explains that she intends to keep working and that she and Mulder are going to investigate Scully's cancer through, like, the justice system rather than her going into hospital and receiving treatment. Like, she really wants to continue to work. And Skinner seems a little bit confused about this. I think this is not what he was expecting. But basically, Mulder thinks there's a connection between Scully's cancer and a series of women who were abducted and then also developed cancer and health problems. And we saw these women in episode 731 and the episode Nisai. So it's like that two-parter about the train carriage and the alien being experimented on, and the alien-human hybrid being experimented on the train carriage. And I think that's the episode that Scully met Mufon, each other's network. So it's harking back to a previous episode. I always love it when the X-Files does that, when it's like it shows some sort of continuity, because in serialized television, you know, you can go from one episode to another and sometimes they don't always seem connected, especially in the 90s. Serialized television, something would happen one week and then you'd never hear about it again. But with the X-Files, really changed that, didn't it? It sort of carried the story across multiple episodes.
And continuity has not been the X-Files' strong suit on many occasions. I think it's one of the things I like about Memento Mori is that, oh my goodness, an episode from the past is being referenced directly as though it meant something and still does. And I love that. It amazes me that, as you said at the beginning about how this was a very last-minute idea for an episode, because I thought they'd been planning it since that two-parter the previous season with Nisei and 731. I thought that's when they were basically like, all right, and then next season we're going to have this episode and this is what's going to happen. So it looks planned from the get-go. So, obviously it works really well. I can't believe they weren't planning to do this episode at that point, because it seems like it was inevitable. And I think it was to a certain extent in their minds as well. But, I love the way that those stories fit together.
Yeah, I think they had planned on, well, obviously they planned on revisiting Scully's abduction, and definitely they planned on the cancer. But I think maybe they hadn't planned it at this particular point, and I think that's why the script had to be written so quickly. I think there was supposed to be a Darren Morgan episode. I think it was Darren Morgan.
I think it was Darren Morgan, yeah.
Yeah, and for some reason he couldn't do it, so they did write this. And I think it's pretty well written for something that was written in the space of like 3 or 4 days.
Well, yeah, it's written by 4 people, and it comes out well enough to win to be nominated for an Emmy for writing. So, how amazing is that? I think that the X-Files, on just a brief tangent, is at its best when it's under the gun because of circumstance, because we get Memento Mori, and of course we got Scully's abduction in the first place because of her pregnancy, Gillian Anderson's pregnancy. So it seems like when external factors force the writers to do something maybe out of their comfort zone or something, that's when great stuff happens. So it certainly did in this case.
In the next scene, Mulder and Scully go to Pennsylvania to find Betsy Hagopian. And Betsy Hagopian was a member of the MUFON group that was mentioned in that two-parter that I mentioned, Nisei and 731. She's a woman that we've previously heard about. She was abducted, and she removed the chip that was found in the back of her neck from her abduction, and subsequently got cancer. And a lot of the MUFON ladies all had the same chip in the same place, and that's where Scully had the chip as well. And Scully's also had the chip removed. So they arrive at Betsy's house, and sadly Betsy has actually died, so they don't get to meet Betsy. But they decide to investigate the place anyway, and while standing in the living room, Scully has a flashback where she sees all the MUFON ladies who she met in the previous episodes. And she's very unnerved by this. She's obviously... The situation with the cancer is becoming much more wider and more frightening. It's not just that she's got cancer, it's that this cancer could have somehow been given to her with a bunch of other women who've also been abducted, which is kind of a horrible idea, really. So both Mulder and Scully go into the basement, I think it's the basement, and they discover that someone is remotely downloading data from Betsy's computer. And this is very 90s. I thought it was very 90s.
It's so 90s.
Was really old.
Yeah, I love it.
Mulder's like, I think a fax is coming through or something.
Yes, it's a fax, or a computer modem is trying to connect.
Yeah. And also there's lots of UFO stuff on the walls, like a UFO network just intrinsically seems linked with the 90s in my head, Yeah. So does the 90s stuff, obviously at the time when they were filming it, it wasn't nostalgic because it was filmed in the 90s, but does the 90s sort of elements of the X-Files make you feel nostalgic?
Oh, totally. I love that bit now for totally different reasons than I ever would have when I watched it. At the time I watched it, I think I was like, okay, well, let's just, plot advancement, whatever. But now I watch it and I'm like, I haven't heard that sound in so long. The sound of, it does, a fax coming through, or that was the sound of dial-up when every time I logged onto the internet. So it does make me super nostalgic to hear it. I love it. I love how, at the time, of course, it was a contemporary show for me. But now it's like a period piece in a way, in a sense. And, of course, it captures it perfectly because that's when it was being made. So I love that part of it. I love that aspect of it.
Yeah, and I think if you've been a fan for a long time and you watched it originally in the 90s, which both you and I did, I think you also lived through the 90s yourself. So there is that kind of, there is something sort of sweetly nostalgic about it. I'm like, oh, I remember that kind of computer. I remember floppy disks. Like at one point, I think in this episode, Mulder holds up a floppy disk, and I'm like, oh,
he does. I'm like,
disks.
Oh my gosh! When he said disk, he meant disc. I remember those.
Yeah.
3.5 inch to be specific. He's got a 3.5 inch disc.
So there is something kind of, it's a little bit romantic about it. I know it's ridiculous, but
I
think
love
it's because you're thinking of an age when technology was, I guess more primitive, but perhaps maybe a little bit more simple. I don't know.
Yeah, well, different, that's for sure. I mean, and I was old enough to be working in offices at that point too, so I was, it was all that stuff's all very familiar to me for that reason.
So they traced the download to a residence of a man called Kurt Crawford. And both of them try and get into his apartment. And in the process of trying to get into his apartment, Kurt comes out and tries to run away, and they chase Kurt down. And in the process of chasing him down, and in the action, Scully starts to have a nosebleed. And Mulder seems really concerned, really worried about her. And Scully acts really irritable about it, like she's kind of a bit like she's embarrassed, and she's determined to brush off Mulder's concern. She's like, I'm fine, quit staring at me. And this made me think, because Scully does this a lot, she sort of brushes off Mulder's concern for her in other episodes as well. She's been abducted, and like in Irresistible, she tries not to cry in front of him. In other episodes, she actually goes to see the FBI counselor at one point, doesn't she? And she sort of says, I don't want him to think that I'm frightened or that I can't do my job. So she does get better at accepting Mulder's support and sort of affection and concern for her later in the series, much later, obviously. But she often tries to hide her weaknesses and her fear and her pain, and she tries to sort of present this very strong front to him. Why do you think she does this?
I think, for a lot of the reasons that you hit on, that she doesn't want to appear weak. I think that she's always conscious of the fact that she's a woman in a man's world, and she doesn't want anyone to accuse her of being a weak woman or thinking that women are weak or overly emotional. She really wants to show that that's not the case. And I think that's also her nature and her personality. I think she's a very sort of tough person who holds her emotions in. I think we can kind of, we can see that from her dad a little bit in the brief time we see him in Beyond the Sea, that, as this sort of naval captain type, that he was also like that, very, level-headed and tough, and, you don't show too much emotion. So, and, she's all about the science and that sort of thing. So I think that's kind of her personality to a certain extent. And I think she's also, specific to this scene, still in denial about what's going on to her and what's happening. And she's trying to be tough, not just for Mulder, but for herself as well. She wants to tell herself, I'm fine. We used to joke back in the day online about, and I mean, I know we still do, but especially back then, because that was the case so much in these seasons, how often Scully would say, I'm fine. Like, we'd count like the number of times she said it. And this episode, I think, may have set a record for the number of times she says, I'm fine, because she just says it so often. But you'll always know whenever Scully says, I'm fine, she so isn't. It's like, it might as well be code for I'm not fine at all, because she always says it when she's least fine. But she's especially kind of almost aggressive in the scene when she says it. She's like aggressively fine. She's so almost like you say, like angry, like, quit staring at me. That line really gets me every time, because she says it so intensely. It's like it's not her usual tone of voice at all. She's freaked out. I think she's freaked out at that moment, and Mulder's the look he's giving her is freaking her out, because it's like, if he's that worried, then there's something to be worried about, and I don't want to hear that. I don't want to know that. So he's she doesn't want him to stare at her, because she doesn't want to know how bad this is, and he's the only one that seems to be reflecting that right now, because she doesn't want to think about it.
Yeah, she's sort of protesting too much, isn't she? She's like, like, I'm fine. Yeah, you're right. And the more she says it, the more You're like, nope, you're not. And Mulder's a bit different. He doesn't act like that, I don't think, when something's bothering him.
Yeah.
I think he only ever really says it when he wants to do something and Scully's trying to prevent him, like, you need to go to hospital. He's like, I'm fine. But, yeah, he's much more emotionally open than she is. I've always thought that.
Yeah,
he
definitely.
sort of expresses his emotions much more publicly as well. And he's, he gets angry and openly. He often flies off the handle, and I don't know if anyone's done any sort of research into this, but I always wonder how many times they cry, and I think Mulder cries more than Scully does.
Yeah, I'm inclined
you know
to
what
think
I mean?
that.
He's just much more emotionally extroverted, I think.
Yeah. He's just kind of like, he doesn't generally try to hide it. He feels what he's feeling.
So it turns out that Kurt Crawford is part of the same MUFON network as Betsy Hagopian. And the real bombshells dropped, which is that all the women who were in the UFO network, which is called MUFON, are all dead. They're all dead now. So they've all contracted cancer and they've all died, like in the last year. And the look on Scully's face when she's told this, she's just like, I think it's starting to hit home now that almost everyone who's been in the same situation that she has not survived the cancer. Except for one woman who's called Penny Norton, and Penny Norton's in hospital. And we did meet Penny Norton back in a previous episode. I think it was 7. No, it was Nisai, I think it was. Mm-hmm. And then Penny Norton was a kind of a sweet character, so it's really sad to hear that she's in hospital. So this is a very scary foreshadowing of what could happen to Scully.
That moment in the scene where she realizes that all of the women are dead. And again, it's perfect acting between Mulder and Scully, because Mulder never actually tells her that the women are all dead. I think she says something to him like, well, we have to check his story, Kirk Crawford. We have to check, does he really know these women? And Mulder just looks at her and says, we can't. And that's all he says, and gives her that look, and she gets it right away. And then, I think the next thing we know she gets it because she says, we don't get it yet. They get it for each other, but she needs to explain it to the audience. So she says something to Kurt like, how did they die? And I think from that moment on in the scene, she's not quite thinking clearly. She's just freaked out. She's freaked out to find out that they're all dead. Just the way she reacts when, later on that scene, the next scene when Mulder says something like, they're all dead. And Mulder and Scully reacts and says, no, they are not. One of them's still alive. And it's like, okay, well, almost all of them. But she's so, again, just kind of like, kind of touchy. And so she's freaked out, obviously, about that. And so I think she's not quite thinking clearly. I think it's a little weird that Mulder thinks that Scully has to go and interview Penny Northern when obviously she's upset about it. Why she has to go and do that by herself, or her at all to do that Mulder has to talk her into that. Like, he couldn't have gone with her, or maybe gone instead of her. But no, I guess he has to stay behind and root through the files with Kurt Crawford, and only Scully can go and interview Penny Northern. So why bother spending the time trying to convince her? Just go with her, why don't you? So that's it's a little weird.
Yeah, I guess the plot has to put them in different situations, doesn't it? Like for the story reasons, so that's why it's written that way. Yeah, they are both acting a little bit erratic because, like you say, she sort of argues with him, and then also, and I think it would actually be upsetting to find out that all these women you'd met had died, regardless of whether or not she had cancer or not. It would be upsetting for Scully to have spent like a few days or an afternoon or whatever with this whole room of women who've all been abducted. Yeah. And then to find out they're all dead. I mean, that would just upset anyone, really.
Yeah, it's shocking.
Yeah, definitely. And then later on, Mulder actually says, when Scully asks him, we'll get to this, but when Scully asks him for him to come to tell her mother and for him to come to the hospital with her clothing, he gets really angry. He sort of slams Jerry. So I think they're both very frustrated. I think they want to change the situation, but I think both of them don't really know how to do it, and they don't know what to do, and neither of them have the cure for cancer. So
yeah, Mulder is so sort of supportive and calm, and hey, I'll be right there on the phone and throughout the episode with Scully. But that's one of the few moments where we get to see how he's really feeling, where he kind of slams the filing cabinet shut. He doesn't let Scully see him like that, but we know this is how Mulder always seems to react when he's upset about something, is he gets angry. So we see that coming out at that moment, but I love the way David Duchovny plays that scene, because on the phone, he's like, I'll be right there. And you can tell it's like his heart is breaking, but that he's trying to sound even and calm, but that it's how hard that is at that moment for Mulder.
Yeah, and I think I read somewhere ages ago that David Duchovny thought quite carefully about how Mulder would react to Scully having cancer. And he thought that Mulder would react with anger because he would feel helpless. And in a similar way, he sort of reacts that way when he is trying to find out something to do with Samantha. You know, he kind of becomes obsessive and angry, and then goes off and does something dangerous, like breaking into a government facility or pursuing a bounty hunter or something. And it's because I think in both situations he feels helpless. Like, he was helpless to save his sister, who he loved, and now he's helpless to save Scully, who he loves. So, in a way, I think that's kind of actually quite normal. I mean, when someone you care is seriously ill or in a really bad situation and you can't do anything about it, your frustration can very quickly turn to anger. Yeah. So it's actually kind of normal, really, isn't it?
Yeah, especially for men. Not all men, of course, but it does tend to be something that society expects men to be. And so men tend to express those kind of feelings through anger a lot of the time. So it seems very believable to me that's how Mulder expresses his feelings of fear and helplessness is by being angry.
Scully goes to see Penny Northern in hospital, and Penny is really very sick, and she tells Scully that she remembers her from when they were both being held while they were being abducted. And she says that she remembers comforting Scully after the tests. And I've always thought this was a really sweet part of the story. And I actually thought it was a nice touch for the writers to put that in, that even though Scully can't remember it, that there was other people with her when she was abducted. So there were other women, in the facility where she was kept, or the spaceship, or the train carriage, wherever you imagine it to be. And that they were all being tested on, but that there was some sort of comfort there for her. Like, Penny was taking care of her, or the other women, were kind of comforting each other. It makes the whole sort of abduction storyline a little bit less distressing. I mean, it's still pretty distressing. But as a woman, I always found it really upsetting that the majority of the conspiracy is surrounded around women being taken and their fertility messed with and them being experimented on. So the idea that the women were sort of comforting each other sort of shows a little bit of solidarity. Yeah. But Scully, of course, doesn't remember any of this. And she doesn't, she kind of rejects it repeatedly. She rejects remembering it. And actually, we don't really get to hear exactly about what happened with Scully's abduction. I mean, she does have a hypnosis session, doesn't she? Would you like to have known more about what happened while she was abducted, or is it okay for it to be a bit vague?
I think it's definitely very X-Files for it to be vague, that's for sure. Maybe, I mean, obviously I was always curious and always wanted to know more, but, thinking about it in the context of the X-Files, it makes sense that we don't know for sure. It's not 100% explained what happened to her, and so, like as often happens on the X-Files, you can sort of find a lot of different bits and pieces to support whatever your take on it is, and that makes it more interesting in a way. If they explained everything perfectly, then why we couldn't talk about this episode the way we are right now, because there wouldn't be that much to talk about as much. So at the time, certainly, I was like, oh, come on, Scully, don't cut off Penny when she's trying to tell you about your abduction. She's like the only one left who can tell you. Let her tell the story. But, Scully cannot hear it. She doesn't want to hear it. She's just not. She's so far into denial, and she knows that she can't handle it. She can't handle hearing it because it was obviously extremely traumatizing. And she's just not emotionally in a place where she can handle that trauma, which is totally understandable, but frustrating when you're watching it and want to hear what Penny's going to say. So she doesn't get a chance to tell us much of the story. But, I think that's okay. I think that's probably for the best. Because, and honestly, I feel like Chris Carter changes his mind a few times in the course of the series about exactly what happened to Scully as well. So you can kind of pick whichever point you feel comfortable with and say, yeah, I agree with this version of what happened to her. And that's fine. That's the X-Files.
Yeah, it very much is the X-Files, though, isn't it? Because I think other shows, especially shows that are around today, like shows that are made now, I think they would show everything in great, basically in a great deal of detail. Yeah. They would show like flashbacks, all sorts of stuff. Like I think in recent years, I don't think subtlety is something that is very often found in television, especially serialized television. So whether or not Chris Carter left it out because he didn't want to write it, or he wasn't sure what to write, or he wanted it to be mysterious, or he actually thought it would be better if it was sort of referred to in small images or occasional bits of information, I actually think it works. I don't think I would have wanted a huge, long, big flashback that explained everything that happened to Scully while she was abducted.
Yeah, that would be too ordinary, wouldn't it? That would just be too much like every other show, and the X-Files always seems to exist in its own special heightened universe, and the more sort of nitty-gritty detail we get, the less sort of magical it feels in a way. So that just contributes to sort of the atmosphere of the show. So I think it's probably a good thing.
Yeah, and it allows you to imagine things as a viewer as well, doesn't it? So it allows you to imagine some awful abduction scenario, which can make things a bit more frightening, can't it? I mean, if you see everything, it's not always as scary, is it? So.
Yeah, we see just enough to know that it's horrible, and then we can kind of fill in the details with whatever is most scary to us. And exactly. I think that's really effective.
So Mulder, meanwhile, is still rifling through paperwork, and he finds out that a lot of the women of the MUFON group were being treated for infertility. And he's basically getting ready to go investigate this like assisted conception, like IVF clinic. And Scully calls him basically and asks him to call her mother and to bring her some overnight clothes, and basically change her clothes to the hospital, because she's decided to be treated by a doctor that Penny Northern is being treated by, called Dr. Scanlon. And then she says the corniest line of the entire episode. She says, "The truth is in me." And I was like, oh, no.
I love that line, though. I love that line. We both know the truth is in me. I love it.
And just is like, okay.
It is corny, of course, but, the cornier the better for me. So I loved it because, the truth is always, of course, what the X-Files is all about. But, I always look at that now, looking back on it, when she says that we both know the truth is in me. I mean, it is kind of a little cringy, but it, to me, also sort of announces this is going to be the focus of the show now for the next little while, is the truth now is about my cancer. The truth is not temporarily about aliens or Samantha's abduction. Now, for a while, the truth is going to be about Scully. So I like it for that reason. It's a little. I certainly don't disagree with you, but I love it for some reason.
It's true, actually. I mean, as much as I grin and like groan when she says it, it is actually true. The truth is in her. I mean, if they could just figure out everything around her abduction, and they could figure out like how she got given cancer, and because she's got some sort of strange DNA in her, if they could figure that out, then they probably could figure out like the whole conspiracy. And then
it's true. And Gillian Anderson can sell those corny lines so well. No one could do it like she can. And it's, instead of it just being totally like groan-inducing, for me, it's like, that's so beautiful. So, yeah, kudos to her for pulling off those lines. She deserved the Emmy just for making that line work.
She does do it with a straight face.
She does. It's very beautiful.
So, Mulder's a little bit irritable at this. Like he says very calmly to her, "I'm on my way." And then once he gets on the phone, he sort of bangs the filing cabinet behind him and leaves. And he leaves Kurt without any explanation as to where he's going.
It's like at least he doesn't just ditch Scully like that. He does it to other people too. So we know it's just Kurt. A Mulder thing.
So Kurt is alone, and then he's promptly assassinated by a man in black, by a government assassin who, or conspiracy assassin, who has a sort of metal toothpick, which is the weapon that we've seen in the past that's used to kill alien shapeshifters. or alien hybrids, whatever you want to call them. And so obviously we know that Kurt is not completely human. He's part of the whole mystery. And as he lies there dead on the ground, he starts to dissolve green, which is what happened to the clones of Samantha in, is it Colony? I think Colony in Endgame.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. So I've always had a little bit of a problem with the fact that these clones dissolve green. It's just too. It's just too. I don't know. It's really bright green.
It's a really bright green. It looks a little. It's a little fake looking, isn't it? Well, it's very alien. It's very like no green on this earth.
I think what happened was they did it initially, and then they kind of got stuck with it. You know how they wrote themselves into a corner with that special effect,
Yeah,
and they're like, "Damn,
did.
now we always have to use this." So.
Now we always have to have that ridiculous color green.
But did you think it was a? Do you think it was a good twist? Like,
finding
out that Kurt was a hybrid.
Yeah, at the time, I thought at that point in the story, the first time I saw it, I thought he was maybe going to turn out to be like an alien bounty hunter, that he was like a real bad guy. Not that necessarily he was a clone, I don't think I was thinking yet. But it was certainly like, shock! What's this? More confusion, more mysteries await. So, yeah, it was a really cool twist.
It's a cool twist, but I also felt really bad for Kurt. I was like, Kurt,
he was,
you know.
Yeah, he was nice.
He was trying to help him out, you know.
Yeah,
So.
I liked Kurt.
The next scene reveals Scully waking up in hospital, and it's one of those scenes again where, like the teaser, where everything's kind of blurry and there's a bright light, and then things come into focus, and it's her doctor standing over her. I thought that was quite nice, actually, that effect. Just to make her seem disorientated, she wakes up in hospital. And her doctor's standing over her, and it's Dr. Scanlon. And he's just creepy, man. He's just really creepy. Like, why is he standing in the room watching her sleep? She's like, I was asleep. And he's like, I know.
It is. I noticed. Yeah, you noticed that you were just standing there still, like you got nowhere else to be. Like, that is a little weird, actually. And that first moment when she wakes up and he's like, and it's this bright light. I don't know if this was the intention, but I always see that as him looking like an alien. I don't know if that's what he's supposed to look like, but that's the way that the light is and the way his silhouette is looks like that kind of spindly gray alien type of look. Although I've also heard people interpret it as him looking like an angel. So I guess it's whatever you think it looks like to you.
I thought he was dodgy from the beginning, though, because most scientists and doctors in the X-Files are dodgy as it is.
Yeah.
You know, there are a few good ones, but they normally end up dead somehow. So,
yeah.
You know, I mean, the X-Files really is suspicious of science.
Yeah.
You know, as much as it champions science, it's also suspicious of people having too much power in science. You know, the doctors experimenting, people going crazy with science. Yeah. So I sort of thought, like, Dr. Scanlon, he was just, the way he was introduced, I was like, there's something weird going on with this guy.
Yeah, for sure. He's just a little too nice.
He's a little too nice. And he's watching her sleep. So.
And he's watching her sleep. He's nice and creepy, and that's not a good combination.
So he decides that he's going to give her gene therapy as well as radiation and chemo. And that this is like a new, I think the radiation and the chemo is something they give people with cancer, but this gene therapy is a new treatment. And he's using it on Penny Norton, and it's Scully's hope, basically, that she can be cured, or at least that the cancer can be halted. And so while he's telling her about this, Scully's mum, Margaret Scully, arrives, and Margaret Scully is played by Sheila Larkin, who I've always thought has done a brilliant job in the X-Files.
Yeah.
She's completely believable in her role.
Love her.
Yeah, she's really good. And she actually has a lot to work with in this scene, because she has to go from being very angry to, like, very frightened. Yeah, like within seconds, doesn't she?
Yeah,
like,
she does it so well, and it's so believable. I mean, it's great. It's great writing that she doesn't come in and isn't immediately the perfect mom. That she's a human being and doesn't react perfectly at first. That she is angry. So and at first she's kind of like babbling about how she drove up and it's faster than taking the shuttle, and it's all just a really believable scene. And Sheila Larkin and Gillian Anderson have this great chemistry whenever they're in scenes together. So I always love them together, and that's another great scene for them. could have used more in that episode, but there's a lot going on.
Yeah, there's a lot going on. So we only really get to see Mama Scully in this very short like little scene. But she's very angry, and rightly so, because Scully has not told her anything about the cancer. And this must be especially hard for Margaret because of the fact that she's lost a daughter before. So Scully's sister Melissa has been killed. So she only has one daughter left, as she says. And I've always thought Scully was actually quite closed off with her family. I've always thought she kept her family at arm's length. Is that something that you also felt as well?
Yeah, I think that she does tend to keep them at arm's length. She has an interesting relationship with her family in a lot of ways. I've always been curious about how much contact she has with her mother, because they obviously have a warm relationship. And when they're together, they always seem to know a lot about what's going on in each other's lives, except for this scene, obviously. So I'm never quite clear on, like, do they get together for, like, dinner on a regular basis, or does she go for months without talking to her mom? I get the feeling it's more the latter, that she doesn't keep as close touch with her mom as her mom probably wishes she did. And, Scully's just very busy, and I think Scully's always got this vague feeling that she's a disappointment to her family, and she just doesn't want to hear it. And, of course, there's always Brother Bill to deal with. And so she's like, yeah, I think I'm just going to kind of like do my own thing here. But she still has that connection with her mom. When she's in need, Mom is always there for her. And I think that's a very believable kind of relationship. And I think that following Melissa's murder, it kind of contributed a little bit more to that. I'm not going to go so far as to call it estrangement, but that kind of discomfort maybe that Scully feels around her family because she feels guilty about Melissa's death. And you can even see it in this scene when Ma Scully says, I've only got, you're my only daughter. And when Scully says, I know, there's that look on her face of guilt and sadness, and she's like tense at the same time. So it says a lot, as always. Gillian Anderson says a lot with just that brief little look and that brief line.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think Melissa's death has definitely made her more distant from her family, because obviously she now knows that the work that she does can put her family in danger. Mm-hmm. Also, exactly. As well, doing such an extreme job, I would think it would be really hard. The scenes like, the sort of later in, I think it's in season 4 as well, with Emily and A Christmas Carol, she goes back to visit her family for Christmas, and the real sort of mundanity, like the everyday normal life of other people, doesn't exist for Mulder and Scully. So her job distances herself from them because of what she's seen and what she's experienced and what she's gone through and what she does on a daily basis. I mean, so it must be really super hard to go into a normal domestic situation, sit around the dinner table and, like, I don't know, talk about the turkey you've cooked, or talk about whatever, when you've just been chasing aliens the day before.
Exactly. Yeah, good point.
So she's definitely more distant from her family, and as the show goes on, obviously she becomes more distant as well. But so I could see that she would tell Mulder about the cancer first rather than her mother, because she's closer to Mulder. But from her mother's point of view, that's not cool. Yeah.
It probably tends to, I mean, she's worried and she's upset, and it probably underscores perhaps a building irritation she's had with how little contact Scully's had with her, and so this just kind of brings it all to a head.
And she's also worried about her as well. And so in a way, she's acting a little bit like Mulder has in previous scenes. She's angry because she's worried. Yeah. She's angry because she's scared. Yeah. So after this, we have an extended scene in which Scully is shown being treated, I think with radiation, in a sort of big medical machine. Yeah. And there's another voiceover.
Oh, yeah, no, guard your ears. There's another voiceover.
I've had talking about cancer and explaining to Mulder that he shouldn't feel that he could have saved her by doing some sort of covert investigation, which he's literally doing at that moment, where she's like, don't investigate, and he's off investigating. And she does talk about cancer and what, cancer comes as a stranger and then it becomes part of you, and then in fighting the cancer you're also fighting yourself. And I mean, that was kind of a nice analogy, but
Yeah.
And then it also reveals that she also reveals that the monologues are for him, obviously, because she's addressing him. And so presumably this is part of a letter or a diary that she's writing to him, which I thought was kind of sweet, but then also at the same time I was like, why do we have to listen to this?
Or at least say something interesting. Like, I mean, this is like, finally, as the viewer, we get to hear Scully's innermost feelings addressed directly to Mulder. And she's going on about science and demon possession and the unwanted visitor. And it's like, this is not what I had in mind when it came to hearing Scully's innermost feelings towards Mulder. So, yeah, wasted opportunity. And, like, what are we even talking about right now?
Sort of also implies that he doesn't know what cancer is. She's like, I'm going to have to explain cancer to Mulder.
No, I have to explain it to you on your terms because you're like a child.
Yeah, like,
so true.
He's never going to get this, so I'm going to write it down.
And use his special terms that I'll use language that Mulder will understand, because apparently he doesn't understand anything to do with medicine.
She must have somehow heard, like, some of his previous monologues. Maybe he, like, recorded them when he was doing, like, a write-up of a case or something. He recorded a long monologue, and she's like, oh, this is how he talks. Okay.
I must write like this now. Maybe it was after, like, Little Green Men, where he does a long recording that's kind of addressed to Scully. Maybe she actually listened to that and thought, oh, gee, this is how he wants me to speak. Okay, well, I guess I'd better keep up. I better up my game in terms of the poetic language when I'm addressing him in writing. So maybe it all makes sense.
Also, there's no way they're platonic, because I don't know about you, but my husband does not write me letters like this, okay?
No way. No.
Do you know what I mean? I was like, if they're going to constantly be writing these long or recording these long monologues to each other, there's got to be something going on.
Honestly, especially since it's not like she doesn't see him. I mean, she just saw him like a couple of days ago. If they'd been like, apart for months at a time, it would make more sense. But I mean, she's going to see him again really soon. So, but no, she's got this really long, kind of very flowery journal that she's writing with. I think the intention that he was going to read it after she died or something like that was maybe the general gist. I think that's what the intention was, because she talks about, was it like, if you read this after, the darkness may have swallowed me or something like that. So I think she meant for him to find it after she died, and that it would all, like, it's like her parting words to him. And oh my goodness, really? These were the parting words you wanted to have for him? But I guess maybe that's what it was meant to be. But oh dear, no. I mean, if I was Mulder and she had died and I found something written for me, I'd be like, oh, I'm going to find out how she really felt. And I'd be reading it going, oh no, this is not what I expected. She was obsessed with cancer. I don't even understand what she's saying. Yeah,
this would offer me no comfort whatsoever.
Yeah, no, not good.
Anyway, so he is doing covert investigation while she's like, don't do it. Because he's breaking into the fertility clinic that he found out about. And he does this amazing thing where his breaking into the fertility clinic is jumping over the reception desk. Through a little glass window.
He does.
Yeah, which I was like, wow.
Did he even try the door? I don't remember.
Yeah,
he just went straight to jumping over the desk.
Jumped over the desk. He finds lots of files and a computer which he tries to hack. And he's interrupted by Kurt's clone, who I'm going to call Bert.
Yeah.
And Bert looks just like Kurt.
Bert. Indeed.
And obviously Mulder doesn't know that Bert isn't Kurt. He thinks Bert is Kurt. Because he's not seen that Kurt's been killed, so he
just assumes, and that's like a shocker when we see Kurt's face in the flashlight. There, it's like, oh my god, he's a clone.
You're like, how did he survive? And then he didn't, obviously, because he's green goo,
Yeah.
But, so Bert and Mulder hack into the computer. And this is where the snow globe comes into play, the $2,000 snow globe. I mean, how much money was spent making this? I mean, I'm sure I could make a snow globe for a lot less money.
Seriously? I mean, people are selling snow globes on Etsy for like, $10. I can't believe they're all putting $2,000 into them. I just have to give a personal shout out, though, to the snow globe, because Vegreville, the town referenced on the snow globe, is about an hour east of where I live in Alberta. So I live in Edmonton. Vegreville is a real town in Alberta, and it has a real giant Easter egg like that. It's like a Ukrainian Easter egg. It's like a roadside attraction, and I've seen it. It's huge, and that's what's depicted in the snow globe. So if you were to have a snow globe of Vegreville, it makes total sense that you'd have the huge Easter egg in it. So shout out Vegreville people. Every time I see Vegreville now, I'm always like, snow globe.
So is that an actual Easter egg then? Do you think that they put it in there as like an Easter egg joke? No, I mean like a TV Easter egg.
Yeah, I don't know. For a long time, I mean, when I first watched the episode, I lived in Nova Scotia and didn't actually know where Vegreville was. It was only when I moved to Alberta a few years ago that I started to grasp, Vegreville. It's only also just recently dawned on me, it's an egg, and there's everything in this episode is about fertility and ova and eggs, and so maybe that's why it was worth $2,000, is because they really wanted to highlight the egginess of it, which, I mean, is really truly what you see in Vegreville too, so it's not a totally made up, egg. When you look at the snow globe carefully, now everyone go back, and I want you just to pause on the snow globe, please. You can see it's a giant egg, because there's like trees depicted in the snow globe that are like tiny trees in comparison to the size of the egg, because it's depicting the actual real Vegreville giant Ukrainian Easter egg. So that's what it actually is. But I think that maybe there is like something about an egg being said there, perhaps. I can't believe it's a coincidence that they went with an egg there. Or like you say, maybe it's also meant to be a little winky Easter egg thing.
But yeah, you're right. I think, I hadn't thought about it, but they are in a fertility clinic, so it would kind of make sense, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
That it's like a joke. It's like well, I don't know how funny it is, but it's like a joke for a receptionist who works in a fertility clinic to have a snow globe that has a town in it that has a giant Easter egg in it. Yeah. It's a long-winded joke, but it's a joke.
Yeah, I don't know. I still haven't quite figured out exactly the significance.
To something, yeah.
But I do love that I always did wonder about where that snow globe came from, so it's so curious to me that they actually had it made. They really wanted it to be Vegreville, which makes me think there must have been somebody on the crew who was from Alberta and somehow knew Vegreville and knew about this giant egg, because it's a pretty obscure reference, but it's a real place and a real reference. So, but I don't think there are any snow globes that you could buy in Vegreville. I mean, the big egg is definitely a big attraction, but I don't think it has like that gigantic a tourism industry to actually make its own snow globes. But if they did, I would buy them.
So maybe they had to pay the town a certain amount of money or something, and that's why it cost $2,000.
Maybe. I mean, however they made this happen for Vegreville, there can't have been anything better in the history of any kind of advertising for Vegreville, because X-Files the world over know that name. I remember talking about this on Twitter once, and like someone actually said for a while I actually used that as my computer password, which is kind of a fun idea, like as an X-File to do that, right? I mean, probably a lot of people did. So, the city parents of Vegreville should have been happy about that, because there were people all over the world who were enchanted by the concept of Vegreville without ever knowing where or what it was.
So they managed to use the snow globe. Vegreville is the password, obviously, to hack into the computer. And then suddenly there's this very quick edit where Maura slams down the snow globe. So we get quite a close shot up of the snow globe. Just as the scene very quickly cuts to Scully having a flashback of being experimented on with a drill basically coming down towards her forehead, which is right, like kind of like the top of her nose, which is where she's actually got the cancer. And she's actually having a nightmare of a surgical procedure that happened while she was abducted. And I actually completely forgot about that. And when I was watching it this time, I sort of jumped. I was like, oh, I completely forgot about that really quick cut. And actually, this whole episode, in terms of the cinematography and the editing, is actually quite effective, I think, and quite artistic. And I was wondering, did you like the cinematography of this episode? Did you like the editing?
Yeah, I mean, it's just a really well done episode visually and editing wise. And Rob Bowman's the director, as you mentioned, and I just always love Rob Bowman episodes. And we know he directed the movie, so he's obviously one of their top guys. and everything he does, I think, is awesome. So it's a really, he takes, scenes that maybe aren't otherwise all that exciting and makes them interesting by the way that he shoots them. And yeah, that scene in particular with Scully's nightmare it's a shocking scene and just a little hint, again, like we were talking earlier about what had happened. So yeah, I really like the look of the episode. I mean, a lot of it happens in a hospital, but then it still looks really interesting and still kind of engaging. And I think Rob Bowman just has a real sort of cinematic eye, and his scenes are always framed in an interesting, engaging way, but never in a distracting way. You're never aware of, oh, well, someone's showing off here. No, it always just contributes to the story. And I think it's part of why I love this episode so much, is that I like the look of it as well.
Yeah, some of the scenes later on that we'll go on to talk about in the government facility, I think, are actually really good.
Yeah.
The sort of the way they're filmed and the lighting and everything.
Yeah.
So Penny wakes Scully from her nightmare, and she's sort of sitting next to her, and basically Scully's been having the nightmare, and Penny's come in and found her having the nightmare and woken her up. And she comforts her, and she's sort of trying to encourage her to remember her abduction and trying to find out the answers by confronting her trauma. And Scully just won't do it. She's just not having it. Mm. And I actually really like I said before, I actually really like the idea of these women who have gone through such an awful experience kind of bonding together. Yeah. I think it's something good to have come out of the abduction, which is that Scully met Penny, and that the two of them have been able to support each other in these very dark days where they're suffering from cancer. So Mulder goes on to visit Skinner after hacking the fertility clinic's files, and he says he's found Scully's name in a list from the IVF clinic, like a directory, which is and the IVF clinic is funded by the federal government, and the information that he's found points to a research facility. And Mulder wants Skinner to set up a meeting with the cigarette-smoking man, because he thinks that the cigarette-smoking man can tell him more about the research facility and about how Scully's ended up on this directory. And that he also gets a bit angry in this scene. He's like, I'm damn sure that Scully has never, gone to get IVF treatment, basically. Yeah. And he I think both of them are starting to suspect that something really terribly, even worse than the cancer, or maybe not worse than the cancer, but like as bad as the cancer, has happened to her in other ways too, like to do with her fertility, which is really creepy. It's kind of very intrusive and violating, Yeah. And Skinner refuses to set up a meeting with cigarette-smoking man, and he sort of says you can find out this information yourself. What he knows, you can know, which is completely untrue, because the whole series is them trying to find out what cigarette-smoking man knows.
Yeah, it's not as easy as you think, Skinner.
Not as easy. But I think he's trying to protect Mulder. Yeah. I think he's trying to protect him by refusing to contact cigarette-smoking man. Do you think that too?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, Skinner plays it very straight in that scene. I assume already at that point he's thinking he's going to take the hit for Mulder and find out himself. But he's super convincing that, this is not going to happen. Don't do it. And he just sounds like he's being regular kind of stubborn Skinner who doesn't quite get it. But in reality, he totally gets it and has his own plan. But you'd never know it. He sort of fobs Mulder off. And, of course, Mulder's mad at him. And Dad Skinner is kind of like, you can be as mad as you want to at me, young man. I'm protecting you. Skinner's at his best in many ways in this episode. I love Skinner in this episode. We don't see much of him, but he's just doing the Skinner thing. He's being very sort of tough and sort of a little hard on Mulder. But then behind the scenes, he's actually putting himself on the line for Mulder and Scully and doing these kind of wonderful things that he never would get credit for. So I love Skinner. He's awesome.
Yeah, and it's sort of sad because obviously, Mulder doesn't see it that way. Mulder sees it as Skinner's preventing him or obstructing him, or not helping him. But Skinner obviously is. He's just helping out from the sidelines, from behind the curtains or whatever. And so I think that's the sad thing about it, is Mulder is walking around annoyed at Skinner when Skinner's actually the one saving you behind it all.
Yeah, it's so sweet. And even like as the viewer at that point, I was like, oh, Skinner, come on. Loosen up, dude. Help them. But we had no idea that he was going to.
Yeah, so at that point we don't know. We don't know. That comes a bit later. So then Mulder, having been turned away by Skinner, turns to the lone gunman for help.
Yay.
And yeah, I know, they appeared. I was like, hey, it's a lone gunman. I totally forgot they were in this episode.
Always a good thing. Always a good thing.
And they hack into the mainframe of the research facility, and they find a file on Scully. So there's several levels of hacking here. I think maybe there's been about two or three sort of examples of hacking in just this one episode. Like, they're breaking barriers everywhere.
Yeah, they are.
I was like, how many files can there be? It's like a file within a file within a file within a file. It's like some sort of strange, like, Escher painting or something.
It is. It is a little confusing, actually. I mean, for as many times as I've watched this episode, I honestly kind of would often tune out during these scenes about files and hacking, because I'm like, which file are we talking about now and which facility? Because there's the initial fertility clinic, and then there's this other facility, and yeah, it can get a little confusing if you're not like super paying attention, which sometimes I'm just waiting for the next Mulder Scully scene. So sometimes I was a little confused. It's only when I kind of make myself concentrate that I can follow it.
Yeah, and I'm an administrator by trade. I actually work in a university which has a lot of files and a lot of bureaucracy. But it's nothing compared to this conspiracy. I'm an
administrative assistant at a university, so you and I know what bureaucracy is all about. That's why we see things so similarly. So this is X-Files bureaucracy is always on a whole other level.
I was like, are they going to take over the planet with aliens, or are they going to just keep a whole load of records and files?
Exactly.
So they break into the mainframe of the research facility, and they find a file on Scully which shows that she has unusual DNA in her system. But they knew this already from when she was returned after being abducted, that she had some sort of mutating, changing DNA in her body that was making her ill. And presumably this is what's giving her cancer now, is this mutating DNA. And this is the scene where they use the term funky poaching. Yeah. Where Mulder's like, we're going to go do some funky poaching.
Yeah.
So that's nice. I thought that was quite funny.
Yeah.
And they go looking for evidence, basically, and they decide to break into the research facility, the three of them. So and then we go to find out what Skinner's actually doing, and Skinner is actually meeting cigarette smoking man in Mulder's office, and they both have a little standoff, and Skinner offers to do a deal with CSM for Scully's life, which is like doing a deal with the devil. And then they both make quite a few bad jokes about elevators.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a great scene. I love the way it's shot. It is like, at one point, cigarette smoking man says something like, "You think I'm the devil, Mr. Skinner?" And there is like this sense that he is, and he's lit by his cigarette, and he's like in the depths of hell in the basement. I mean, I think that William B. Davis is awesome in that scene. I love it. He just sounds so kind of like vaguely amused by the whole thing, and it's all sort of scary and amusing to him, and it's all really like, oh, you just hate him, and he's just so sinister. But yeah, great scene, but then it ends with this reference again, because they've made all these elevator references up until this point in the scene, and like, CSM leaves the room and says something like, "Which way is the elevator, Mr. Skinner?" or something like that. And I'm like, that was such a strong scene, and like, they couldn't have ended it a little stronger than that. Like, why we're going to bring up that elevator thing? They went to that well one time too many, I think, in that scene. But other than that, it's a really great scene. Whenever Skinner and CSM are kind of going toe to toe a little bit like that, it's always really interesting. They just have such an interesting dynamic. And Skinner's always, he's tough and powerful, but CSM just very calmly and coolly cuts him down to size. And it just always kind of gets me so mad, but in like a really intrigued way. So love that scene.
Yeah, I also get really mad, actually, in these scenes with Cigarette Smoking Man, partly because I have a real fondness for Skinner, but also because it's obviously completely clear that he knows exactly what happened to Scully.
Yeah.
You know, and he knows about Scully's cancer before Skinner even says anything. He knows that Scully's ill. And when he's like, oh, is it terminal? Like, he knows it's terminal. And I'm like, screw you. You know exactly what's going on. Yeah, and you're just going to sit by and let this woman die. Like, well, you're going to let all these women die.
Yeah,
you know?
He's just like at his worst sort of game playing kind of self in that scene.
Yeah, and he's going to use Scully's cancer to get Skinner to do something for him.
Yeah.
And that's even worse. He's going to play with the life of another human being so that he can manipulate other human beings. He basically is Satan.
Yeah, and
I don't think because he takes an elevator up to his office. I take an elevator up to my office. Elevators go up, Skinner. They go up.
It is possible. I'm sure, it's meant to be this really like, oh, it's a dig, but no, it doesn't work. But no. But CSM is he's just so sinister and just, Skinner is being so intense and CSM is being so like, yeah, whatever, dude, I'm in control here. And this is all vaguely amusing to me. And it's just like, ho, 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 ho. Because it's a very serious situation. But CSM is just kind of like, he just loves the power and just loves being in the position he's in.
And there's a certain element of getting Skinner back, isn't there? Because Skinner's had one over on him, like, in... I think it's in the beginning of the second series, hasn't he?
Yeah.
Or is it the end of the second series? It's one of the. I think it's the end of the second series, isn't it? Where is it Anasazi and the Blessing Way and Paperclip?
Yeah.
That's where he sort of says, you can pack her up and kiss my ass.
It's like the best Skinner moment ever.
Yeah, and so because Skinner has, I just think that now, the cigarette smoking man has no problem in using Skinner, humiliating him, getting him to do something bad,
Yeah.
So, and of course Skinner will do this because he wants to save Scully. So.
Yeah. Oh, he's such a secret hero. He's awesome.
Yeah, he really is actually. Really, such a little good guy behind the scenes.
Yeah. Oh, sweet.
So what follows after that is a very Mission Impossible bunch of scenes where Langley and Ferreri hack security systems and cameras of their secret facility from inside an underground tunnel. And Byers and Mulder break into the facility, and they're all like mic'd up, and they're dressed in black, and it is very much like a Mission Impossible. Mulder finds out Scully's cancer doctor is also working at the research lab, so we knew he was a bad doctor, who stands in a room and watches someone sleep? So, he's got to be working with the government to sort of either kill the women or like basically hasten their deaths or whatever.
Yeah.
Byers. So he sends Byers to rush off to prevent Dr. Scanlon from treating Scully any further, and then Ferreri and Langley and Mulder go on with the mission, which is to try and find more information or a cure in this research facility. What did you think of them teaming up like this? Was it part of the episode that you liked?
Yeah, definitely. Because otherwise, I think I would have found that an incredibly dull scene. As it is, the only part. It's my least favorite part of the episode. Mulder sneaking around darkened corridors. I mean, it's just we've seen it all before. It goes on a little longer than I would like, but the presence of the lone gunman kind of saves it because I love them and they have some funny lines and they always keep my interest whenever they're in a scene. So thank goodness for that. And it gave someone for Mulder to sort of play off of a bit. It takes a little too long to kind of get the exposition we need from that scene for my liking. So thank goodness the lone gunmen are there. They improve every episode that they're on.
Yeah, they really do, actually. I think because they're all three of them are such different characters, so they can play off each other, can't they? It's including this scene and some of the other stuff as well, actually, like the dissolving alien and everything, kind of mixes up the sort of genres of the X-Files a little bit. I feel like they're kind of trying to pack a lot into this one episode, and I do think that sometimes it suffers a bit from that. Like, perhaps there could have been a few more scenes with Skinner or a few more scenes of Scully in the hospital, but we're already on this adventure now with Mulder, and so... But it shows the lengths that Mulder's willing to go to try and save Scully, so...
Yeah.
So while investigating the facility, Mulder finds a whole bunch of hybrid clones of Kurt and Bert. And
Kurt, Bird, and many others.
And Turt, and, all the rest of them.
Shirt, I don't know. But yeah, they're all there.
So, Orkut 1, 2, 3, and 4. So, they're all scientists working at the facility, and they're trying to subvert the government project that's creating human-alien hybrid clones. So they take Mulder into this lab, which has huge tanks in it, and which humans are being sort of kept in these tanks of liquid, including a clone of the boy that Mulder saw in the farm, on the farm in the episode Herrenvolk, which started out season 4. So it's a nice little nod back to Herrenvolk and the previous sort of season opener. I thought this was a really atmospheric scene with the sort of these big tanks full of kind of green sort of murky liquid with human beings in them, and the music and the lighting and also the props. And I actually think that the scene directly after that, in which Mulder's taken into this sort of metallic shiny room full of basically human ova and little like file boxes with people's names on them, I thought that was really well filmed as well.
Yeah.
I know that you said this, it takes a long time to get to the actual sort of reveal, but did you enjoy any of the visual look of this?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the scene once he finally finds Kurt, Bert, and all his friends, that's a good scene. That's finally we're actually getting somewhere. There's like real progress in the plot and in the whole sort of mythology at that point, and we actually learn quite a lot. It's a very slow moving episode up until that point in terms of real revelations, but we get quite a few of them in quite a short time. So I actually quite like that scene, and the scene in that room where they're storing the ova. It's so shiny. It's just like I'm always like dazzled by how sort of like shiny that whole room is. And it's like if they were going to spend $2,000 on something, I would have thought it was building that room, quite frankly, because the room looks really cool and really visually interesting. And that whole scene with sort of discovering Scully's ova and all of that is just it's really quite interesting, and like, oh, now I'm interested. And you know, when Mulder says these women are your mothers, it's just a really sort of like, it's a kind of a touching line in a way. And so that whole scene is actually really quite engaging.
Yeah, I think that whole scene is probably one of my favourite bits of the whole episode, actually. And I think the idea that the government is harvesting ova and then making, from these abducted women, and then making clones, alien human hybrid clones, or experimenting to make these individuals. And then these individuals are trying to save these women because they are their biological mothers. I actually thought that was a really nice idea. They don't really ever revisit that in the X-Files later on. There's no indication that any other clones are trying to save the women who basically are their biological mothers. There is a moment where Mulder says, "Oh, they're your birth mothers," and I feel like at this point in the series, I don't feel like the writers understood human reproduction, because for one thing...
Just at that point?
Just that point. Well, yeah, you're right, actually. Kind of, they don't seem to ever understand it. I mean, despite the fact that I'm sure they have scientific advisors on the staff who tell them stuff, but...
Yeah.
Well, maybe they don't. I don't know. Maybe at this point they didn't. But, yeah, a birth mother is not someone who... A birth mother is someone who gives birth to you. A birth mother isn't someone who is your biological mother that doesn't give birth to you. And what's made quite clear is that these clones are grown in a lab, and then they're somehow matured and grown into people in a lab. I don't know how you would do that, because you can't do that now, science-wise. But
just, magic, just scientific magic.
It's science fiction. It's okay, but. Then Mulder should say they're your biological mothers, not your birth mothers. And also, there's no way you can keep human ova alive in a suit jacket or a pocket in a pair of trousers. Mulder must have magical frozen refrigerated trousers, because and I think that bothers me more than anything. Well, no, actually not anything, but there's lots of things in the X-Files that bother me, but this bothers me so much more than a lot of other things, that he puts her eggs in his pocket and then walks around for hours with them in his pocket.
Yes, with no sense of urgency. No sense of urgency whatsoever that he should do something with them right away. But they're very carefully kept in this very shiny room, in this very precious little drawer, and he just throws them into his pocket and spends the rest of the night walking around with them. And then, yeah, like you say, doesn't tell her at the end. So, yeah, if I have, as much as I am bothered by the voiceovers in Memento Mori, that's what actually bothers me the most, is that he takes her over, doesn't tell her, and leaves some of the ova behind. Like, what's that?
That's true, he does do that.
Like, oh yeah, you go ahead, continue your experiments with Scully's ova. I'm just going to take one as a little sample for myself. Why don't you take all of the vials? He left some of them behind. So the whole ova part, and then, yeah, they're not your birth mothers, they're your biological mothers. Yeah, everything to do with ova in this episode, not super successful in my books.
I mean, I would just torch the place. I would just cause they're going to go on to make more human beings with these poor women's ova. And I actually think that one of the most awful things as well is that he takes the ova and then he doesn't tell her that he's had them. Or I think he must take them to be frozen somewhere else, right? But that's not how you defrost ova anyway. But never mind. But he takes them somewhere else, like, for safekeeping. Maybe he puts them in his freezer at home. Who knows? But he doesn't tell her for years. Yeah, right?
That's really, really troublesome. Like, really troublesome. Like, it's almost unforgivable. It's one of those things that I have a hard time defending the X-Files when they do stuff like that, and I have a hard time defending Mulder when he does stuff like that. When the conversation turns to how women are treated on the X-Files and how Scully is treated on the X-Files, this whole plot of her ova being stolen by Mulder after it having been taken from her in a very traumatic way, and him not even bothering to tell her that apparently he went to quite a bit of trouble to, like, put it somewhere and have it tested or something, and not telling her until he absolutely had to for years later. I can't defend that as a woman or as a feminist or anything else. It's just bad. It's just they should not. That's really terrible writing, terrible characterization. There's nothing about that that's a good idea.
I think the only way I can rationalise it is that the writers forgot about this and then suddenly remembered it later on. And I actually think that could happen, because a lot of the episodes are written by different people. It's quite possible that you could forget what this whole storyline is. But then I feel like somebody should be keeping a show Bible. Definitely. Or they should be writing a timeline of things that happen.
Yeah, it's just another one of those examples of just appalling continuity. And just the fact that no one cared enough about Scully's ova to even keep track of where they were. It's just very unfortunate. It's really unfortunate. But I mean, it's not unusual on the X-Files to forget about things for years at a time. So it's just, it's a little bit egregious in this case because they're Scully's ova. They should have mattered more than they actually did.
Yeah, and I think because of the way they were taken and stuff, it is a very violating thing, really, to take somebody's, sexually reproductive, like, biological material and then sort of, like, forget about it or take it and then use it. Or, it is actually a real violation of somebody's privacy and their rights, really. So, so it is actually quite an upsetting, serious thing, and I think maybe it didn't feel that way to a lot of the writers. I don't know, but anyway, actually, in the end, this episode isn't really about her ova because he pockets it in his pocket. He puts them in his pocket, and then we don't hear about them again. So it's actually about him. He was there looking for a cure for Scully's cancer and didn't find it. Yeah. And it is nice that the hybrids are trying to stop the project to save their biological mothers. And I'm kind of sad that we don't hear about this ever again. I'm sad that we don't ever see them try and do that again. But
there was a lot of really good ideas in Memento Mori that, like, when I watched it at the time, I kind of felt like the mythology is really coming together right now and really heading in a great direction. And they dropped a lot of the balls that they picked up in that episode, which disappoints me. Yeah,
I mean, I guess they can't carry along all strands of all stories, so I think that's just something they must have just dropped. So there's a little action scene where Mulder tries to get out of the facility, and he almost gets shot. And it's one of those scenes where someone's walking towards you, shooting repeatedly at, like, a bulletproof door, and you're like, when is it going to break? When is it going to break? So
Yeah, it's pretty scary. I mean, for as many times as I've watched that scene, and it is a little kind of formulaic, like you say, but it always gets me every time. I'm like, oh God, just get Mulder out of there. The guy is shooting right at him. It always gets me every time. It's obviously well shot, no pun intended, and just well edited. It is very suspenseful.
Yeah, and there's, I mean, you know he's going to be okay, but
yeah,
you don't know if he's not going to be shot. Like, he could be shot and still.
It's still very scary.
Yeah. So he does manage to get out in time. They manage to unlock the door. Lone gunman managed to unlock the door for him. And the next thing he does is he rushes to the hospital to find Scully. And he goes into a room and she's not there. And he does his classic Mulder thing where he rushes out into a hallway and starts yelling at a medical professional, like, where is she? And I love it when he's in this mode. I could watch Mulder yell in a hospital about Scully, like, every day of the week.
Yeah, it happens on a pretty regular basis, and it's always awesome. And I love the nurse is kind of like, I don't know where she is. Like, dude, chill. I love her attitude. Just
go to the bathroom.
Yeah, it's like, I don't know. Yeah, I love it. Love it.
And then he finds Byers, and Byers is like, I found her. It's okay. I stopped the treatments. Dr. Scanlon is gone. And they rush into the room where they think Scully is, and she's in the room with Penny Northern, who is actually dying. And so they creep out, like, whoops, creep out quietly. And then we have this little sad scene where Penny's basically on her deathbed, and she says to Scully, like, don't give up hope. And, you know, you have to be the one that survives all of this. Like, you have to survive. And she doesn't say something like get revenge, but I think she's implying, like, you have to stop this and bring these people to justice.
Yeah.
So, and she says don't give up hope, which is really important, because that's what Scully then goes on to do, is to, like, her hope is reignited. And then Penny dies, which is really sad, because Penny was kind of a good person, and she didn't really deserve.
Penny was sweet.
Yeah, she was sweet. Yeah. So then we have this lovely scene where Mulder's waiting outside and giving Scully some time with Penny. And then we have this lovely scene where they talk to each other in the hallway after Penny's died. And Scully's obviously really upset. And Gillian Anderson does some really great acting in this scene. That she sort of talks about how she's decided not to let the cancer beat her. And Mulder tells her that he believes that she will save herself, which I thought was a nice thing to say. That as a scientist, she'll figure out what happened, and she'll figure out how to sort of solve this, and she'll save herself. And Scully says she's going to return to work, which gives Mulder this great smile, you know, like his big smile on his face, like she's coming back. And Mulder says, you know, I read what you wrote. And Scully's like, oh no.
Yeah. Dude.
I didn't want you to read that.
None of us did.
None of us wanted to hear it, but there we go.
We didn't.
Well, we did. And then she sort of says, oh yeah, I'm coming back to work. And then they have this little scene where he hugs her and he embraces her and kisses her, and my heart just melts. And then he walks away with her over in his pocket. But yeah.
And we just ignore that part of the scene.
But as a shipper, like, the scene must make you very happy.
Oh yeah, I love that scene. That's one of my favorite scenes in the whole series, for sure. I love everything about it, and certainly at that point, especially, like, you know, this was in the 4th season, and we've gotten a lot of sort of shippy moments since then. That's sort of become increasingly shippy as the years pass. But certainly, especially the first time we saw it, this was like a big deal. Like, you know, they're hugging. He's kissing the top of her head. There's just like this moment between them. It's so beautiful, and you know, and Scully's not wearing her usual kind of like high heels because she's in the hospital in her slippers. So she's like super short, and he's like super tall, and they're just so sweet when they're hugging, when they're like that. And it's such a beautiful scene, and everything about it is just, the acting is fantastic. The writing is not always perfect in that scene. Sometimes I'm a little bit like, what are we talking about here again? It's just kind of, it's fine. But again, it's like, I'm just going to ignore the script a little bit sometimes and just focus on the expressions on their faces, which are better than any script could be. And I love everything about it. And I do love some of the lines, as much as sometimes the conversation it's a little hard to follow for me. I do like that line where Mulder says, you'll there's a way and you'll find it to save yourself. This idea that, despite the fact that Mulder has spent so much of this episode running around to save Scully, he believes she'll be her own savior, not him. It doesn't really turn out that way in the end. That's another one of those balls that they kind of dropped, I think. But I liked that idea. That was a great concept that Scully is the hero of her own story, not Mulder. And so I loved that. And I mean, probably one of my very favorite lines from the whole series, it's actually right in my Twitter bio, is when Mulder says, the truth will save you, Scully. I think it'll save both of us. And I just talk about swooning. I love that line, love that moment, and what it says, and the way, to me it implies that saving Scully will save Mulder because he needs her that much, and that it's about Scully at that point instead of everything always being about Mulder all the time. So it's just really sweet and beautiful, and beautifully shot, and this kind of hospital hallway, and I love everything about that scene. It's very beautiful to me. It's also actually a shot from that scene is also in my Twitter header picture as well. So I obviously love that scene a lot.
Yeah, and I think there are some deleted scenes, aren't there, where he actually kisses her on the mouth, and I think that's interesting because I think, I mean, whether or not David Duchovny did that, or whether they filmed two scenes because they wanted to see what it looked like or whatever, but I mean, some of the stuff that I've read sort of implies that the actors were so into their roles, and they were so much they're such good actors, and they were really sort of just going with what felt natural in lots of scenes, not just this one, but lots of scenes throughout the show, that very often the director had to sort of get them to tone it down, don't, I think even in season 10 there was a moment where Scully runs when Mulder's in the car and he's injured or he's ill or whatever, and she runs in, throws open the car door, and then kind of goes and pulls him out of the car and kisses him on the cheek or something, and the director had to cut it because he was like, no, but this isn't too much, we can't have it, because I think they're always trying to tone it down because they want it to be sort of romantic but not overly romantic, because obviously won't they keeps people watching. They're
always toning it down more than us shippers would want. We can't have nice things, but but in the case of Memento Mori, I've seen the sort of outtake kiss where it's like a proper kiss on the lips, and as much as I enjoy that, I totally see why it wouldn't have made a lot of sense in the context of that episode. It's better to have just this very sort of sweet kiss on the forehead, rather than a real kiss. It just would have been a bit of an odd addition to the scene, and would have felt a little out of place in that scene. So I think the kiss on the forehead was probably a pretty good choice. So I am fine with that. And there's another deleted scene from Memento Mori, if I remember correctly, with Bill Scully in it. Have you heard of this? There's I think Bill Scully shows up at one point, and I think have I watched it or heard of it? I don't know, but if that scene, from what I understand, if that scene had been left in, then some of the dialogue in this final scene would have made slightly more sense when she's talking about her family and wanting to prove things to them. Without that scene, I think it makes less sense, but that's okay. They're looking at each other with those wonderful looks and that fantastic hug and kiss on the forehead, and I'm happy with some of those key lines I really like, and it's just beautifully acted and beautifully shot, so I'm happy with it. It's just makes me really happy every time I watch that scene. I remember at the first time I watched it, we were losing it, us shippers that night, because it was so much more than we normally ever got, and those things were very few and far between back then. So, and I mean, they still are, but even more so back then.
So the last scene shows Skinner in his office receiving a phone call from Mulder. Mulder's like, "Why are you still awake?" And Skinner's like, "It's 5:30 in the morning." And Skinner's like, "I've got work to do." And I'm like, "Oh, Skinner." And Mulder's like, "Yeah, you were right. It's, Scully's coming back to work. You were right. It was the best thing not to contact Cigarette Smoking Man." And unbeknownst to him, Cigarette Smoking Man is actually sitting in Skinner's office.
Mm-hmm.
And so Skinner gets off the phone, and cigarette smacking man basically is like, I'm sure I can figure out, something for you to do for me, in order to save Scully. So it's obvious that Mulder is going to have to pay a high price to save Scully's life, and he's made a deal with the devil. And I thought that was a brilliant ending to this episode.
Yeah,
because it's like a cliffhanger, but also it's also not too much of a cliffhanger. Like, we can go a few episodes without finding out what Skinner's going to do, and that's kind of what happens. Is later on we find out what Skinner's having to do for cigarette smoking man.
It is a really solid ending. It's like, because we have this very sort of sweet scene in the hospital with Mulder and Scully, but we can't end it like that because it's the X-Files, and so we have to have this kind of sinister punch in the gut, really. It's just one of those scenes that when you watch it the first time, when the credits roll at the end, you go, oh, what is happening now? And that's just so X-Files, and I love that. So, yeah, it's just leaves you something's going to happen. Something's going to come out of this. You don't know when exactly, but it opens up a whole new interesting set of possibilities that just make you say, what is going to happen next? And it's a great ending.
Yeah, it's a great ending. I think because it sets Skinner up for a future storyline. It sets Skinner up also for future mystery and future peril. And he did kind of escape cigarette smoking man there for a while, and you're like, no, he's gonna have to do bad things. But also as well, Scully is hopeful, and there's this kind of renewed sense of optimism. But like with so many things with the X-Files, there's always a darkness hidden there as well. So this is a nice little note to end on. So, we asked the X-Files Basement crew, so that's the Xcast podcast fan group on Facebook, what they thought of this episode. And so we have a few little comments, and apologies ahead of time if I pronounce anyone's names incorrectly. You can tell me later on when the episode airs how to properly pronounce your names. But first of all, we had a little comment from Cathy Glinski, and she said this is one of her favourite episodes of all time. She's a big fan of Chris Carter penned voiceovers, so she's the opposite of us.
There we go. There are some people that like it.
She says, I just can't help it. She loves the purple prose, she says. She loves Scully's struggle to maintain dignity and control while accepting that she may not be able to. And I think that's true, actually. Scully's sort of struggling to sort of be dignified. But
yeah, that's important to Scully, isn't it? To be dignified. I think it's a good word.
And she also says she loves Mulder's unwillingness to accept this fate for Scully. The desperation motivating him is heartbreaking. And the ending, when Scully decides to keep going and Mulder pledges to help her find the truth, is everything I want for the two of them at this point in the series.
Right-o. Yeah, bang on.
Yeah, we agree with Cathy.
Have totally 100% nailed it.
So Michael Little says, a good but highly overrated episode.
Michael. And
he says, I think both One Breath and Redux 2 are better. So what do you think? Do you think the other episodes like One Breath and the Redux sort of trilogy are better than this one in terms of dealing with Scully's abduction and cancer?
Wow. Those are two other really great episodes. So it's hard to compare them because they're all great in different ways. I tend to Redux 2 is right up there. One of my favorites. One Breath is definitely in like my top 20 as well. But I think I like this one a little better for myself because Scully gets to do a little bit more. She's not just in a hospital the whole time or in a coma in the case of One Breath. She does wind up in the hospital, but she still does quite a bit even while she's in the hospital. She's still doing, she's talking to Penny Northern. We get some interesting scenes with them, whereas she does nothing pretty much in One Breath, and she does not a lot in Redux 2. She's bedbound for the entire episode, so I think that's, for me, why Memento Mori nudges ahead a little bit. But those are two great episodes. I'm not going to strenuously argue with Michael on that. So
for Andrew Blaker also said a sort of similar thing. He said, well, kind of similar. He said, for me, it's a mixed bag. The cancer arc is fantastic, and Gillian Anderson gives a great performance. But when it veers off into the whole face-melting green goo, it almost feels like a mishmash of too many sci-fi elements. Had it focused more on the immediate Scully story, maybe more like One Breath, I think it could have been stronger. I think that's a fair point for sure. It's a little tricky to combine all those
different elements. They work okay for me. I would certainly wouldn't say it's a seamless transition between the scenes in terms of the Mulder's investigation and Scully's journey. But, I get that it's the X-Files and we're going to have some action and some green goo and stuff. And that's just part of what to expect. And I think that it works fine because everything that happens is still to do with Scully, even though she's not in those scenes and even though they seem a little out of place in some ways. They're all still there. It's all about finding a cure for Scully. So I can kind of live with it in that sense, but I can certainly see the critique. I can understand that point of view.
So Alicia Walker-Scherer said that, she said she had a lot to say, and one of the things that she said was that she actually also really did like the monologue. She called the beginning monologue a beautiful monologue.
Okay, that's good. I mean, hey,
a Chris Carter masterpiece. I think the thing about the X-Files is that so many people see it in completely different ways, which is one of the great things about it.
Yeah, totally true. I mean, there are people that love Chris Carter monologues, no question about it. You and I clearly are not among them. But I know that I've certainly seen lots of people online say how much they love them. So it's just kind of what your taste is. For me, it's just a little like almost comically over the top. But for some people, it's just like it's beautiful writing. And so to them, they love it. And that's great. I wish I could feel that way, to be honest. I'd like Memento Mori a lot better if I did. Not that I don't love it already, but then it would be perfect.
There's also situations like cases where people don't like the episodes where there's anything sort of relationship wise between Mulder and Scully, and I really like those episodes. So there's shippers and non-shippers, and I think that's one of the great things about the show, that people can totally get completely different things from it. So there's something for everyone. So Cortlan Waters Bartley said that she isn't actually as fond of the cancer arc as all the other parts of the story. She does mention that there's some really fantastic Scully moments, but some of the things that she really likes are the lone gunman being involved in the work that they do, Maggie Scully, and also the stuff to do with the MUFON women. It manages to contain a huge mix of mythology and character plots all in 1 hour. Yeah, I kind of agree with her. It does manage to mix them all together. Mm-hmm. I sometimes think there's too much in this episode, I think. But it has stood the test of time. I would definitely still give it a 9 out of 10.
Yeah, oh, definitely. And there is a lot going on, but it's rare that we get mythology episodes that are one episode, that are not part of a two-parter. And I like that. It's one of the things I like about Memento Mori. It's just its own little story. That's still a mythology story, but they're not trying to work it into a two-parter or something like that. And it makes it a little tighter, I think, even though, there's a lot of elements there. I think that they kind of pull it off because we just don't get that many mythology episodes like that are not multi-part.
Well, it's been fun taking a close look at Memento Mori and Scully's struggle to find the truth about her cancer. But before we go, Jen, where can we find you online?
Well, you can find me on Twitter at JennXFile. That's JennXPhile. JennXFile. Come on by, and all I do is talk about the X-Files. So let's have a chat. Please, someone convince me to like these voiceovers, because I'm really working on it.
And you can find me at Clara Jean MC on Twitter. So thank you for joining us today, Jen. It's been a pleasure having you on the show.
I've enjoyed it immensely. Thank you very much, Clara.
And hopefully we'll be able to podcast again together soon.
Yeah.
And the X-Cast will be back soon, but until then, remember, trust no one.
The X-Cast, an X-Files podcast, is produced and hosted by Tony Black, alongside a dedicated team of podcasters and X-Files fans. You can find the show on Twitter at the X_cast, on Facebook by typing in the X-Cast, or inside our group, the X-Files Basement, an X-Cast podcast fan group, plus on Instagram by typing in the XFcast. If you're a fan of the show, why not support us on Patreon? Exclusive bonus episodes, early access to new episodes, plus become part of our X-Cast community in the Patreon department. To see our monthly subscription options, just head to patreon.com/the Xcast. That's patreon.com/the Xcast. we'd love to see you join our Patreon community. We're also part of the We Made This podcast network at We Made This Pod on Twitter and We Made This on Facebook. You can find a range of shows on TV, film, music and popular culture in general on the network. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.